Marcus never buried the fallen, he left that ritual to the scorching winds. The crimson wasteland had no patience for ceremonies, no room for mourning. Here, beneath the triple suns of Valdris Prime, bones didn't rest. They cracked, bleached, and disappeared beneath the shifting scarlet, dunes like memories of those who once carried them. Yet sometimes the desert offered something in return. He spotted the metallic gleam around noon, just a jagged edge protruding from the dune's peak. Could have been debris, a discarded transport pod, perhaps, or his solar beacon torn from a cargo hauler. But something about the configuration seemed off. Too angular, too purposeful. Marcus adjusted the harness across his chest, salvaged components clinking softly against his spine. Sweat pooled beneath his collar, stinging the burns on his neck. The wasteland air shimmered, bending light like liquid illusion. He muttered under his breath and trudged up the incline regardless. The object came into full view as he approached, a containment unit, half submerged and charred at the edges. Its titanium bars were corroded and peeling, clearly a detention cell of military origin. The type border enforcement used to transport smugglers, dissidents, and refugees back to the fortress cities. He recognized it well. He'd operated those systems once before they branded him a defector, but this one wasn't being used for transport anymore. It had become a tomb. Inside, curled in the far corner like something discarded, was a figure, not quite human. She was petite, delicate-looking, her skin a pale violet shade with deeper purple bruising where trauma had settled. Long strands of silver hair clung to her form like metallic thread pressed against flesh blistered raw from solar exposure. Her limbs were drawn inward, arms crossed protectively over her bare torso, knees pulled up defensively. She wore nothing, had no protection. Just a body abandoned to burn. Marcus's breath caught. He froze, pulse hammering, not from terror but from the sharp, nauseating recognition. It had been 15 years since he last witnessed someone left to perish like this. 15 years since he made the decision that led to his exile, refusing to surrender a group of alien refugees fleeing a raider assault. He hadn't spoken much since. Hadn't trusted anyone since. He didn't rescue people anymore. He scavenged, traded, endured. But this wasn't someone dying. This was someone who'd already been erased from memory. She didn't react as he approached. She didn't lift her head, didn't uncurl her arms. No voice, no fear, no hope, just silence. He crouched beside the containment unit, boots sinking slightly into the sun-heated sand. The lock had corroded through completely. With a single twist and crack, it broke loose. But he didn't open the door immediately. Instead, he removed his outer jacket, dust-stained canvas, patched at the elbows, stiff with salt and perspiration. He slipped it through the bars slowly, carefully, and draped it over her small, trembling frame. She didn't respond, but he noticed it, barely perceptible, the change in her breathing pattern, a slight twitch of her fingers, not comprehension. Just awareness. He opened the containment unit. There was no sudden movement, no collapse, no struggle. She didn't even look at him. Still crouching, he whispered, "I'm not here to harm you." No response. Not even a blink. He hesitated, then reached out gently, placing his hands beneath her shoulders. Her skin was burning, fever perhaps, or just the sun's relentless punishment. She was dangerously light, clearly malnourished. Still, she didn't resist, didn't move. He lifted her from the cage. The moment her body left the metal floor, she curled tighter, knees drawn in, arms around her chest, jacket clutched in fingers that seemed to have forgotten how to grasp. But carrying her wasn't difficult. What weighed on him wasn't her physical form, it was what she reminded him of. One person, one mistake. One girl he couldn't save back when he still wore authorities' colors and believed in orders. She died in a cage too, only hers had walls made of bureaucracy and regulations. He'd been too late then. Maybe he wasn't too late now. The suns pressed down like punishment as he made his way back to his shelter. No shade on this side of the ridge. The hull structure he inhabited shimmered in the heat, half buried in sand, assembled from old mining vessels and freighter remains. Ugly but solid, and for now it would provide sanctuary. Inside, the temperature dropped instantly. Cool air circulated from his salvaged climate systems. It wasn't luxury, but it kept the worst of the heat at bay. He laid her gently onto the padded bench near the rear wall, shifting his tools aside. She didn't stir. He grabbed his water container, soaked a cloth, and squeezed it over her lips. She flinched this time only slightly, eyes fluttering open. Deep amber, not like human eyes. Not like anything he'd encountered before. Alien, definitely. Still, there was something in the way she looked at him, not with understanding, not with fear, but with hollow resignation that said, "Do whatever you want. I'm already gone." "Drink," he said softly, holding the container out. She didn't move. So he set it down nearby and stepped back, giving her space. For a long moment, she lay still. Then slowly, her hand crept forward, her fingers wrapped around the container. She lifted it with trembling effort, bringing it to her mouth like someone who hadn't tasted water in days. She drank too quickly, choked, coughed once, curled tighter. Marcus didn't move. Let her recover. Let her decide what came next. After a pause, she drank again, smaller sips this time, slower progress. He watched her from the far end of the room, seated on a crate, elbows resting on his knees. Outside, the suns dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the floor. He considered the questions accumulating in his mind. Where was she from? What species did she belong to? Who had done this to her? And more than anything, why had they left her to die naked in a resting cage beneath the open sky? "I'm calling you, Lyra," he said, his voice low, "until you're ready to tell me otherwise." Her head didn't move, but her eyes shifted just slightly in his direction. He nodded once more to himself and her. Outside, the wind began to rise, sand scratching against the hull. He moved to close the outer hatch, but paused as something else caught his attention. A sound, not wind, a low distant hum. Rhythmic, mechanical. His chest tightened. A patrol drone. A hover bike. Hard to tell at this distance, but whatever it wasn't part of the usual desert silence. He sealed the hatch. Lyra had fallen asleep, not deeply, her body still curled, her breathing shallow and uneven, but she had released enough to drift. That alone meant something, but Marcus couldn't relax. Not yet. The border laws were clear. Unauthorized sentient contact was a capital offense, especially if it involved concealing an alien, especially one like her. He looked at her one last time, her figure wrapped loosely in his old jacket, legs bare, skin still glowing faintly violet beneath the cooling air. If they found her here. No. He wouldn't let that happen. He leaned against the wall, rifle propped beside him, eyes on the locked hatch. Out there, someone had decided Lyra was expendable. But she wasn't. Not anymore. And if the desert came knocking again, it would have to get through him first. Sleep came to Lyra in fragments, uneven, twitching pieces, like her body didn't trust rest yet. Marcus had stayed awake most of the night, his back pressed to the cool hull of the shelter, rifle across his lap, eyes shifting toward the hatch every time the wind changed direction. Outside, the desert had many ways of whispering threats. Most didn't announce themselves first, but it wasn't the noise that kept him alert, it was her. She lay across from him on the padded bench, limbs drawn in tightly, his old jacket wrapped around her small frame like armor. Even in sleep, she remained tense, fingers curled near her throat, shoulders hunched as if expecting pain to come from every angle. Marcus didn't speak, didn't move, just watched quietly with a patience he hadn't known he still possessed. She was breathing. That was enough. When the first sun rose pale orange behind the dust-stained window, he finally stirred. The quiet buzz of the air filters blended with the wind outside, but his ears strained for something else, that sound from the night before. Mechanical, unnatural. He hadn't heard it again, yet. He stood, knees stiff, neck aching from sleeping, upright, and crossed to the galley. A salvage stove hummed to life under his touch. He dropped a ration cube into a pan, added water, and watched as the contents thickened into something resembling soup. It didn't smell appetizing, but it was warm and it sustained life. Behind him, he heard movement, barely more than a rustle. He turned slowly. Lyra had stirred. She was sitting now, upright, still clutching the oversized jacket to her body. Her long silver hair fell across her face like liquid metal, hiding her expression, but he could see her eyes wide, alert, watching. She didn't speak, but she didn't flinch either. He approached slowly, keeping his tone quiet. "Morning," he said. "I made food. Nothing fancy, but it's hot." No response. He placed the bowl on the table near her and stepped back, giving her space. Her eyes shifted between him and the bowl. Hesitation lingered on her face, not fear now, but uncertainty. Distrust formed by experience, not instinct. Then slowly she reached out. Her fingers closed around the spoon, knuckles pale with effort. The first bite trembled on its way to her mouth. The second was faster. The third, faster, still too fast. She choked, coughing sharply, a flicker of panic rising in her eyes as her throat caught. Marcus stepped forward but stopped himself just in time. Lyra wiped her mouth with her wrist, pressing her lips together. She wasn't looking for help. She was trying not to appear weak. He said nothing, just nodded once. When she finished, she set the bowl down with careful precision, then looked up. Her eyes weren't just amber. They were deep, luminous, but not lifeless. And within that luminescence was something brittle and hard. Awareness. She saw him, not just his shape, but the kind of man he was pretending not to be. He returned her stare for a moment, then broke it. "I've got clothes," he said, crossing the room. She tensed slightly. "Not touching you," he added, "just offering." He opened a storage bin near the wall, one of the few containers he kept sealed unless necessary. From within, he pulled out a small stack of fabric. Scavenged pants, a stitched-together tunic, a thin belt, and a soft brown jacket with sleeves too long. They were clean, functional, nothing beautiful, but whole. He didn't hand them to her. He placed them on the far corner of the table, then stepped back again as far as he could. She didn't reach for them immediately. Instead, she sat there, staring at the fabric, then at him, then back again. Minutes passed. Then she stood. Her legs were still unsteady, knees trembling with effort, but she walked barefoot, slow, determined, until she reached the table. Her hands hovered over the clothes. She touched the tunic first, her fingers pressing into the fabric like she was testing if it was real. Then, with an almost imperceptible breath, she gathered the bundle into her arms and turned her back to him. Marcus turned as well, giving her privacy, retreating to the back of the room. He busied himself with the solar diagnostics, pretended he didn't hear the soft rustle of her removing the jacket, pretended he didn't feel the weight of silence shift into something sacred. When she emerged minutes later, she wore the clothes not like someone who'd been dressed, but someone who had chosen to clothe herself. The pants were loose, the tunic hung unevenly on her frame, but her posture was different, straighter, calmer. He didn't say anything, just offered her another cup of water. This time, she accepted it without hesitation. For the next hour, they existed side by side in quiet tasks. Marcus fixed a coolant leak in the generator housing while Lyra watched, sitting near the corner, arms wrapped loosely around her knees. She didn't speak, but she moved with curiosity now, touching a wire, examining the filter mesh, watching how the soldering iron sparked dot at one point. She pointed to the panel he was working on, tilted her head. Marcus looked up. Power line. It's cracked. Needs resealing. She stared a moment longer, then nodded slowly but deliberately. They didn't need words for that. Later, while cleaning up, he caught her gently folding a pile of old rags near the sleeping bench. She smoothed the edges with great care, aligning the corners like someone restoring sacred order. You don't have to do that, he said quietly. She didn't stop, didn't look up, just kept folding. That night, she slept again, not curled tightly in defense, but lying on her side, knees bent, hands tucked beneath her cheek. And this time, she wore the tunic she'd chosen, not a jacket that happened to matter. Marcus sat beside the entry panel, rifle still leaning against the wall. The desert outside had gone quiet again, too quiet. No birds, no drones, no night scavengers. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been near. Maybe still was. He thought of the patrols, of the black armored enforcement crews who policed the isolation mandates, who believed anything non-human belonged in a laboratory or a cage. He thought of the last refugee he'd tried to save, a boy, no older than 16, gunned down as he ran across the southern ridge. He thought of the tribunal, of being forced to watch as they burned his name from the system registry, called him a sympathizer, called him a traitor. He'd never gotten over the silence of that room. He looked back at Lyra. She stirred faintly. In her sleep, lips parting, whispering something in a language he couldn't understand. Her hand twitched against the wall beside her, fingers splaying, searching. Don't worry, he thought. You're not in that cage anymore. But he knew the truth. The cage didn't vanish just because the door was opened. And this world didn't care who. Survived only who obeyed. A soft hum broke the quiet so faint he almost missed it. Mechanical. Distant. Not wind. Not nature. He stood and moved to the entry port, eyes scanning the ridgeline through the tinted panel. Nothing yet. But something was out there. It always was. He turned back to Lyra, watching her sleep beneath the flickering light of the overhead panel. The jacket he'd given her was folded neatly by her side, untouched. Maybe tomorrow she'd wear it. Maybe not. She was healing. But healing had a sound to it, and sometimes it sounded like the click of metal in the dark. The noise came again at dawn, not the wind, not the familiar groan of metal shifting under temperature change. This was something else, something wrong. A distant hum, steady and mechanical, just faint enough to be missed by an untrained ear, but Marcus heard it. He always heard the things that weren't supposed to be there. He rose from the bench without a sound, rifle in hand, before his feet even touched the floor. The chill of early morning hung in the ship's belly, a brief reprieve before the triple suns would start their punishing climb. Lyra was still asleep, or at least still lying down. She'd taken to sleeping on her side now, curled into a loose arc with one hand tucked beneath her head and the other resting palm down against the bench. Her breathing was slow, steady, but her brow twitched faintly as if her dreams were never quite silent. He didn't want to wake her. Not yet. He crossed the room and opened the upper hatch shutter just a sliver. The desert stretched out before him in all directions, barren and endless. But nestled between the far rocks, barely noticeable against the sand-blasted stone, was a glint of blue, small, pulsing, a drone. Reconnaissance model, low sweep. Not military grade, but close enough. The kind smugglers used to scout terrain, or the kind corporations used to reclaim lost assets. Marcus's jaw tightened. He moved to the supply bin and pulled out his old field scanner, calibrated for passive surveillance sweeps. The reading confirmed its short-range frequency spike. Something was pinging, tracking. His gut turned cold. He turned to Lyra. She was awake now, sitting up, legs dangling off the edge of the bench. Her long silver hair framed her face in a tangled curtain, but her eyes were alert, watching. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her body language said it all. She knew something was wrong. "We've got company," he said. She didn't flinch. "Just waited." Marcus crouched near the bench, his voice low. "There might be a tracker on you, something embedded." At first, she didn't respond. Then, to his surprise, she lifted her pant leg without being asked, revealing the back of her ankle. The burn scar was still fresh, the surrounding skin puffy and bruised. "I need to scan it," he said. She nodded. He passed the reader slowly across the wound. A soft ping lit the screen, faint but active. "Damn," he muttered. "There's a chip still inside." Lyra looked down at the spot, then back at him. Her face was unreadable, but not empty. She reached out and touched his arm gently. "Remove," she said, voice quiet and rough from disuse. He looked up, startled. She met his eyes steadily. "Cut it out." It was the first full sentence she had spoken. Marcus blinked, then gave a small nod. "All right, I'll need a minute." He gathered supplies: scalpel, disinfectant, a cauterizer wand designed for patching metal seams, not skin. It wouldn't be pretty. It wouldn't be painless. He returned and set everything on the table beside her. She had already positioned her legs sideways, her hands folded in her lap, back straight. Braver than most trained soldiers he'd known. "This is going to hurt," he said. "I know," she replied. 2 words, clearer this time. He hesitated for just a breath, then began. The scalpel sliced into the scar tissue with a low hiss. Her body tensed, muscles flinching beneath his touch, but she made no sound. The chip sat just beneath the top layer, crude tech, not designed for longevity. Probably implanted when she was much younger. He pried it out with tweezers, a small black square, still glowing faintly blue. Her fingers gripped the edge of the bench until her knuckles went white. The cauterizer clicked on a sharp electric hum. He sealed the wound in 2 quick passes, pressing gauze to the burn. Lyra exhaled slowly. Her eyes had closed during the procedure. When they opened again, they weren't filled with tears. Just fire. Marcus dropped the chip into a reinforced case and carried it outside. He placed it beneath an old turbine shell and smashed it with the butt of his rifle until it cracked into shards. Then, using his heel, he buried the pieces in the sand. When he returned, Lyra was still seated upright. The fabric of her pant leg rolled back down, her hands resting in her lap. She looked up as he approached. "No more signal," he said. Her mouth moved. Then, "Thank you." Not whispered, not robotic. Earnest. He sat beside the bench and leaned back against the hull, his arms resting across his knees. "You're healing faster than I expected," he said. Lyra gave a soft hum, almost a chuckle. "You expected me to die?" Marcus shrugged. "No, I just didn't know what you'd choose." She tilted her head. "You didn't choose for me." "No," he said, voice low. "I've made that mistake before." She studied him in silence, then finally asked, "Who?" Marcus looked away, eyes distant. Her name was Elena. She was a kid, not much older. "Then you were when they took you." "I was ordered to report her location. She was hiding with a group of other refugees." I hesitated. By the time I made up my mind, it was too late. Lyra was quiet for a long time. Then, gently, she said, "You came. For me." "I wasn't supposed to," he replied, "but you did." Her words landed heavier than he expected. She was speaking more now, still in fragments, still with effort, but there was understanding behind it. not just of language, but of meaning, of trust. The rest of the day passed in a strange rhythm, half silence, half motion. They moved together through the shelter, adjusting filters, rewiring old solar panels. At one point, Lyra spotted a small leak in the power coupler and gestured to it before he noticed. She pointed, raised one eyebrow. "Fix?" she asked. "You're catching on fast," he said. That earned him the faintest smile. It was there for only a second, but it stayed with him. By dusk, they'd rerouted enough power to shield the shelter from another drone sweep. He installed a pulse jammer to scramble any inbound signals. It would hold unless someone came looking. In person, they ate together that evening, seated across the narrow table. Lyra held her spoon properly now, ate slowly, without trembling. When she finished, she looked around the room. "Warm here," she said softly. "It's not much," Marcus replied. "But it's safe, for now." She tapped her fingers against the table, then asked, "You will leave?" Marcus frowned. "Do you want me to?" Her eyes met his. No. There was no hesitation in it. He didn't answer, just leaned back, heart heavier than it should have been. That night, she took the sleeping area closest to the wall, near the heater coils. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for his nod. She chose her place in the room, and for the first time, she slept without flinching. Marcus stayed awake a little longer, listening to the wind hum against the hull. The signal was gone. The chip destroyed, but something told him this wasn't the end of it. Someone had caged her, and no one abandoned property unless they had something worse in mind. The desert wind had died down by evening, replaced by the stillness that only followed deep heat. Dust clung to the air like breath that wouldn't settle. In the shelter of the half-buried outpost, the world was muted, and yet something between them had started to stir. Marcus leaned against the metal hull, arms crossed, watching Lyra as she moved. She was no longer just surviving, she was choosing. She crouched by the broken water filter, her fingers stained with rust, carefully matching parts he'd taught her to recognize just days ago. Every motion was deliberate, her breathing steady. She no longer flinched when he got close. She hadn't spoken all morning, but she didn't need to. Her silence wasn't empty anymore, it was focused, intentional. Still, something hung in the air between them, unsaid, heavy, waiting. "Lyra," he said finally, voice soft. "That's not what I called you when I found you. But it's what you called yourself yesterday." She didn't look up right away. Instead, she finished screwing in a valve, wiped her hands on a cloth, and stood. The sun caught the edge of her silver hair as she turned. "It was never given to me," she said quietly. "I gave it to myself the day I stopped being afraid of my own voice." Marcus stepped closer, searching her eyes. "What does it mean?" She looked past him toward the jagged ridgeline in the distance. "Lyra means one who sings from silence in my people's tongue. Your people. What are they called?" "We're the Villani," she said, "from the crystal valleys beyond the reach. Violet-skinned, bioluminescent in starlight, bonded to the rhythms of the land. We were peaceful cultivators, harmony keepers. We believed in listening before acting. It made us easy prey." Her voice didn't waver, but her hands curled slightly at her sides. "I was taken when I was a child," she continued. "Too young to be named, too old to be ignored. Raiders came while my family was out gathering crystal fruit. I was playing near the edge of the settlement when they grabbed me. I screamed, but it didn't matter." Marcus didn't interrupt. He didn't move, he just listened. "They kept me in a containment cell on a cargo freighter for nearly 8 weeks, she said. Cold metal, no gravity, no day or night. I only knew time had passed when they changed owners." A muscle in her jaw tightened. "I don't remember all the places. Just that they kept changing my name to numbers. They liked that I was exotic, that my skin marked me as rare. At some point, I stopped trying to hold on to anything real, not language, not thought, not even shame. She glanced at Marcus, eyes hard. You want to know why I didn't tell you all this sooner? I figured you would when you were ready. I wasn't. Her voice dipped. When you wrapped me in your jacket, that was the first time someone had given me something without expecting to take anything. Not my obedience, not my body, not my silence. Just given. She stepped forward, close enough that the wind tugged at the edges of her cloak and stirred dust between them. That's when I remembered the name. It came back to me like a dream I didn't know. I'd forgotten. Lyra. My older sister used to whisper it into my ear when we lay under the stars. One day, you'll sing from silence. You'll have a name, and you'll choose where your feet land. I didn't believe her until you showed up. Marcus's throat felt tight. He wasn't good with words, never had been. He fixed things. Machines, engines, panels. But not people. He tried anyway. I think you've been Lyra for a long time, he said. You just hadn't had a reason to say it aloud. Her lips twitched in something close to a smile. Maybe. A silence settled, but this time it was comforting. Familiar. And you? She asked. You've heard my past. What about yours? Marcus looked down at his hand, scarred, calloused, darkened by sun and time. I used to work for the Terran Colonial Administration, he said. Back when the outer colonies were still pretending to be about freedom and fairness. I was a systems engineer, kept outposts running. Power, irrigation, filtration. I saw a lot of things fall apart slowly. Starvation, water poisoning, trade wars. But nothing made me leave, he looked back up, until a station called Haven's Edge. What happened there? There was a village tucked outside its borders, not registered. Non-human settlers, mostly refugees. Quiet folks, they traded well, kept to themselves. They didn't cause problems, just didn't file the right paperwork to exist. Lyra's expression didn't change, but he saw it in her eyes, the familiarity of what came next. My team was ordered to cut their grid, their water, their air filtration, to make a point. And you didn't? She said. Not soon enough, he whispered. I delayed it, bought them time, sent out a warning. But someone sold me out. The order still went through. 3 died, a mother and 2 daughters. The others vanished into the canyons. I never found them again. Lyra stepped closer. And they exiled you for that? They branded me a sympathizer. Took my credentials, revoked my travel rights, put a bounty on my name. If I entered any licensed settlement, I've been out here ever since, trading tech for food, scraping parts from broken hulls, talking to no one, saving nothing, until you. He nodded once. Lyra's gaze held his. You think you failed them? She said. I did. Then maybe that's why you didn't fail me. Her words were soft, but they cut deep. He opened his mouth to respond, but she took his hand first. Her fingers curled through his, warm and firm. I don't want to be silent anymore, she said. You're not. I want to live. Not just survive, Marcus exhaled. Then let's make sure you get to. She looked down at their joined hands, and for a moment, her voice dropped to something even quieter. Can I stay close tonight? You don't have to ask. She stepped forward and leaned her head gently against his shoulder, not like a broken thing needing comfort, but like a person choosing connection. Like someone reclaiming the right to take up space. Marcus didn't move. Just let her rest there, the heat of her skin against his. The suns had set, but warmth lingered not from the desert, from the two of them, alive, awake, naming themselves. One piece at a time. Later that night, Lyra sat beneath the viewport, tracing her fingers through the sand on the floor, humming an old Villani melody that had no words but spoke of light and violet things and names whispered into stars. And Marcus, who once thought his life had burned to ash, realized that maybe, just maybe, something was beginning again. They left the outpost at nightfall. Marcus guided the utility crawler northeast, hugging the ridge where heat storms couldn't reach and patrol drones were least likely to scan. Lyra sat beside him in silence, her eyes fixed ahead, but he could feel her presence humming beside him like a thread pulled tight. They didn't speak much. There wasn't much left to say. They were running, but this time not from memory or guilt, from something real. Something armed. The ambush came just after dawn. Not raiders, not scavengers, not random. The first blast hit the sand 5 meters from the crawler, lifting a geyser of dust into the air and forcing Marcus to swerve hard behind a rock shelf. He cursed and killed the engine, drawing his rifle from the cabin wall as Lyra moved instantly low. Silent, staff in hand, they were. Trained? 3 figures cloaked in shimmer tech surrounded them like phantoms. Tracker units, Marcus muttered. Not bounty hunters. That's real gear. Lyra's eyes narrowed. Syndicate, maybe. Or someone worse. He activated the crawler's speaker. We don't want trouble. Just passing through. There was a pause, then a voice cracked through the dust. We're not here for the vehicle. The voice was filtered cold. Human, but clipped. We're here for the cargo. You're harboring a Class 3 subject of biogenetic origin. Hand it over and walk away. Marcus didn't answer. He turned to Lyra instead. Her jaw was tight, her eyes gleamed. They know what I am, she said. No, Marcus replied. They think they do. She looked at him, truly looked, and in that split second he saw it. She wasn't afraid. She was angry. Let's move, she said. What followed was fast, brutal, beautiful in a way only desperation ever is. Lyra slipped through the dust like she belonged to it. One by one, she dropped the attacker's shock staff, arcing blue fire against metal and skin. Marcus picked off the 4th from a high ledge, one clean shot between armor seams. When it was over, 3 were down. One was alive. Marcus dragged him to the crawler and ripped the helmet off. The man was young, pale, cold sweat on his brow. His eyes flicked to Lyra, then dropped, not in fear, but in recognition. You don't get it, he said through clenched teeth. She's not just a fugitive. She's a failed asset. Marcus knelt beside him, rifle braced on his knee. Explain. The man spat blood. She's from Project Genesis, a hybrid batch. You think she's just another pretty off-worlder? She's not. She's proprietary. Bio-coded. Every cell tagged with syndicate markers. Designed for endurance, obedience, longevity. And now she's walking around with stolen code in her bones. Marcus's stomach twisted. Stolen? The man chuckled. She wasn't supposed to survive detachment. Her signal went cold and they thought she was trash. But then she pinned again, alive, uncontrolled. And that makes her dangerous. He glanced at Lyra, still standing, staff gripped in white-knuckled fingers. She doesn't know what's inside her, does she? She has a name, Marcus said. Lyra, not a number. Not an asset. The soldier sneered. She has a 500 million credit genome. You think she's a person because she bleeds pretty? But to the syndicate, she's data wrapped in skin. Marcus stood. Then they can come and try to collect it. And then he fired. The man crumpled without a sound. The wind howled across the rocks, dragging dust into the silence. Marcus turned back to Lyra. She hadn't moved. Her expression was blank, but her eyes burned. Is it true? She asked. I don't know. But he did. Yeah. Her hands trembled slightly on the shaft of her staff. I don't remember anything like that, she said. I just remember cages, chains, pain. I didn't feel special. You were never the one who needed to feel it, Marcus replied. They did. That's what made you valuable, not your body, not your strength. The fact that they couldn't break you. Lyra's shoulders rose, then fell in a long breath. "What if I'm carrying something inside me?" she asked. "Something not mine, something they built." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Then we'll tear it out piece by piece, and we'll burn every last trace of it." She looked at him as if searching for a lie, but he had nothing left to give her except truth. "We go north," she said. "North it is." She climbed into the crawler without another word, and Marcus followed. The engine roared to life, wheels chewing through the sand. Behind them, the bodies faded into the rising dust dot as they drove. Lyra stared. Out the window, her voice barely audible. "They called me a failed asset. You're not," he said. "They call me dangerous." "You are, but not to me." Her mouth twitched. "Then to who?" Marcus grinned. "To the ones who made the mistake of letting you live." The crawler cut across the flats as the second sun climbed above the ridgeline, its light washing over steel, dust, and defiance. She was no longer a nameless girl in a cage. She was Lyra, and someone was going to regret remembering her name. The silence between them wasn't born of fear. Anymore, it was a silence earned. After the attack and the revelation that Lyra was once classified as a Genesis-class bioasset, they had left the ambush site far behind. The crawler now hummed across flatter, quieter terrain, its battered panels glowing under the soft orange haze of the twin moons. Lyra sat quietly in the passenger seat, her gaze distant but not vacant. Her hands rested loosely on her lap, her bare fingertips brushing one another in a rhythmic pattern like she was counting something or remembering music. Marcus drove with one eye on the scanner, the other on her reflection in the glass. She hadn't said much since they escaped the attack. He didn't push her. There were times when silence wasn't a retreat but a rebuilding, and still he couldn't ignore the shift in her. She hadn't slept since they left the outpost. She hadn't eaten much either. She wasn't trembling or distant, but she was somewhere else inside herself, like she was walking through the world while also walking through memory. "You should eat," he said gently, reaching into the supply bin and handing her a ration. She took it, bit it, swallowed mechanically. "Thanks," she murmured. The wind outside moaned through the high rocks, whistling like a kettle through the cracked edges of the canyon. Marcus turned down the engine and brought them to a soft stop beside a sloped alcove shielded from view. "Let's rest here tonight." Lyra nodded without a word. She climbed out of the crawler and walked slowly to a flat stone. Nearby, sitting with her knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around her legs, she stared upward into the stars. Marcus followed, but gave her space. He set up a small heat field between them and laid out water canisters. Then he sat not facing her, but close enough that she'd know she wasn't alone. She spoke first. "Something's waking up inside me." He looked over quietly. "What do you mean?" Lyra didn't meet his eyes. She touched the side of her temple gently, as if expecting to find something beneath her skin. "When they said I was an asset, I thought it was just a word. A lie to control me. But since then, my dreams have changed." She glanced toward him, her voice thinner now, edged with something close to fear. "I see places I've never been. Rooms of white light and silver floors. People with masks instead of faces. And I speak in those dreams, not Velami, not your language, something else. A language I don't remember learning, but I know it." Marcus leaned forward slowly. "Do you remember what you said?" She closed her eyes. A few seconds passed, then, Unit V7, Lyra online. Protocol integrity fractured. Autonomy active. The words weren't hers, not in tone, not in rhythm. They came from somewhere deeper. From programming. From another self, when she opened her eyes again, they were wet. "I don't want that to be me." "It isn't," he said instantly. "But it's in me." "Maybe. But so is everything else that brought you here. Your name, your memories, your fire. She looked at him now fully, her jaw clenched, her voice rising just a notch. What if I'm just a construct? What if I was never meant to be anything but obedient? What if all of this, the rebellion, the pain, the survival, it's just another script they failed to complete? Marcus didn't move for a moment. Then he stood and walked over to her. He didn't speak right away. He sat beside her on the stone, not touching her, just close enough for her to feel his warmth. Finally, he said, "When I was a kid, I used to rebuild broken drones, salvage them out of trash heaps. I'd pull out their cores, wipe the drives, rebuild from scratch. But some remembered anyway, even after I'd erased every byte." She turned toward him slightly. "They didn't remember orders," he said. "They remembered movement, instinct, how to hover, how to balance. They weren't what they were programmed to be. They were what survived." The break. He looked at her, really looked at her. "You're not a code. You outlived the code," she inhaled sharply. It wasn't a sob, not quite, but it was full of release. "I want that to be true," she whispered. "Then let it be." She leaned into him, then slowly, unsurely, her temple pressed to his shoulder. Not as someone needing comfort, but as someone choosing connection. He didn't move. Not until she said the next words, "Will you stay with me? As long as you want me to." "I do." They stayed like that for a long time, moonlight painting Lyra's skin in pale silver, her hair a dark waterfall down her back, her breath finally slowing. The only sound was the quiet hum of desert wind and the steady thump of two heartbeats. Coming into sync. Later that night, as Marcus slept beside her, Lyra dreamed again. But it was different this time. There was no mask, no code, just a violet field, the sound of bells in the distance, and someone, maybe her sister, holding out a name. Lyra. She woke up just before dawn with Marcus's arm loosely draped over her waist, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was carrying something broken inside her. She felt whole, and maybe that was all that mattered. The twin moons were fading when the port came into view, half buried in dunes. The old trade hub looked more like a graveyard than a promise tower spires collapsed inward, their shadows long and broken. Landing pads had buckled under years of sandstorms, and the antenna array stood like ribs of a long-dead beast. But smoke still drifted from one of the low rooftops. A flag weather-torn but upright snapped in the morning wind. And that was enough. Lyra sat quietly in the passenger seat of the crawler, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her posture had shifted, not closed off, not wounded, but centered. For the first time, Marcus realized she wasn't bracing herself against the world. She was standing within it. He pulled the crawler to a stop just outside the port's old security gate, now rusted open. The engine gave a low sigh as it powered down. They stayed seated for a moment, listening to the stillness. "Doesn't look like much," Marcus muttered. Lyra tilted her head, eyes scanning the horizon. "It looks like no one's watching." He smiled faintly. "That's rarer than you think." She turned toward him. "You've done enough," she said. "You brought me this far." His hands tightened on the steering column. "That's not all I came to do." "I know," she said softly. "But you need to hear me say it. I'm choosing this." A pause, then, voice steady. "I'm choosing you." He looked at her fully, now no walls, no filters, no armor between them. "I've waited a long time," he said, "to believe someone would ever say that again and mean it." Lyra reached out and placed her palm over his heart. "I do." He leaned in slow. Measured, and she met him halfway. Their lips touched tentatively at first, like a question, then again deeper, as if the answer had always been yes. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It was real. It was two people who had survived long enough to stop surviving. When they finally parted, her forehead stayed pressed against his. "I've never kissed anyone," she whispered. Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't know if I was allowed. Marcus's thumb brushed her cheek. You're allowed to want anything now. Her eyes fluttered closed, and for a long, quiet minute she just breathed. Then she sat back, a faint smile tugging at the edge of her lips. So what now? She asked. He glanced out. Toward the old port. We go in. We find fuel, shelter, maybe someone who knows the roads past the cliffs. Will they know who I am? They might. And if they come again, then they'll have to get through both of us. Lyra's smile widened not in defiance, but in peace. He opened the door and stepped out into the soft grit of morning dust. Lyra followed. The wind tugged at her cloak as she looked toward the broken horizon. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she pulled the cloak free and let it drop. Marcus's breath caught not. Because she was exposed. She wasn't. Beneath the cloak, she wore the patched tunic and utility pants they'd sewn from salvaged fabric. But she stood like someone shedding old skin. Like someone who no longer needed permission to exist. She walked ahead of him, shoulders back, head high, and stepped through the gates like someone who had reclaimed the right to take up space. Marcus followed. Inside, the port was mostly deserted. A few salvagers moved quietly between old hangars. One nodded in greeting. No one asked questions. An older woman at a mechanic's booth waved them down. You two look like you've been through hell. Got stuck. South of the ridge, Marcus said. Need fuel, maybe parts to trade. He pulled out a salvage drone core. The woman raised an eyebrow. That'll do. As she turned to fetch supplies, Lyra leaned toward him. This is it, she whispered. He looked at her. She didn't mean the fuel. She meant the beginning. They spent the afternoon inside an old hab unit. The woman rented for half a core and a pack of thermal rations. The floor creaked and the power sputtered now and then, but the door locked and the walls were thick. That night, Lyra stood in front of the mirror, cracked and clouded, and ran. Her fingers along her jawline, not judging, just observing. When Marcus stepped up behind her, she looked at him in the reflection. I used to think this face didn't belong to me, she said. It does now, he replied. She turned, stepped into him, arms wrapping gently around his waist. You said I'm not code. That I'm what survived it. He nodded. I believe you, she said. And then she kissed him again, slower this time, certain. Later, as they lay on the floor wrapped in a shared blanket, her head tucked beneath his chin, she whispered one last thing before sleep claimed her. They wrote me to obey. But I reprogrammed myself with something stronger. What's that? Love. Marcus kissed her hair and held her tighter. For the first time in either of their lives, there were no chains, no commands, no escape plans. Only possibility. Only tomorrow. And for Lyra and Marcus, two souls built from wreckage and silence, tomorrow was more than enough. The breeze smelled like citrus. Lyra stood on the sun-warmed balcony of the cliffside dwelling, watching the wind stir the pale blue curtains behind her. The scent came from the fruit trees below, rows of hybrid citrus native to neither Earth nor Villani land, but something. Grafted, resilient, born of two worlds. She liked that. The town of Nexusport shimmered in the distance, just a loose scattering of buildings stitched together by solar panels and laughter. The people didn't ask where she came from. Some of them didn't even speak a shared language. But they welcomed her because she worked, because she fixed, because she learned quickly and listened deeply, and because Marcus loved her. She still wasn't used to that part. Not completely. Behind her, the soft clink of metal on ceramic echoed. From inside their kitchen, Marcus was making tea again, not because it was necessary. Water was rationed and the tea had no real medicinal value, but because it was the kind of ritual they'd never had before. Something slow, something warm, Something you did when you weren't afraid of dying. She smiled as he emerged, barefoot, wearing a shirt she'd patched with her own hands, holding two mismatched mugs. The steam curled between them. Still watching the clouds for syndicate dropships? He teased. Only if the clouds move suspiciously, she replied dryly. He handed her the mug and leaned on the railing beside her. They stood there a while, shoulder to shoulder, watching the wing-shaped gliders ride the currents over the cliffs. I dreamed about you last night, she said suddenly. He blinked. Yeah? You were younger, no beard, less dust in your voice. Sounds suspicious already. She nudged him gently with her elbow. We were in a greenhouse. You were growing something weird, purple beans, maybe. I was barefoot. There were vines on my legs. His brow furrowed. That's oddly specific. I woke up smiling. He turned toward her, resting one arm on the railing, watching her profile, the way the sun caught the tips of her silver hair, the way her violet skin glowed faintly in the late light. I like when you tell me your dreams, he said. They scare me less when I say them out loud. A quiet moment passed. The world didn't rush them. No alarms, no wind screaming over sand, no metal cages. Just birdsong, engine hum from the distant port, and the steady beat of life continuing. Lyra took a sip of her tea, then set it down. Then she turned fully to face him. I don't want to wait anymore, she said. He tilted his head. For what? For this. She stepped forward, slipping her hands under his shirt to rest on his waist. Her thumbs brushed the skin, their scarred, human, warm. I want to be in love without checking the sky. You are, he said, his voice suddenly low and rough. And I want to say it without it feeling like a goodbye. She leaned in slowly, deliberately. Marcus, she whispered, I love you. The words weren't hesitant. They were smooth as breath. He answered the only way he knew how. He kissed her. Not the cautious kind from that first night, not even the gentle kind from the days that followed. This was a kiss after war, after survival, after doubt. It was the kiss of someone who had made a choice and who had finally been allowed to live that choice. When they parted, their foreheads rested together. I love you too, he said. She smiled, then laughed soft and full. I know, she teased. You pour tea like a man who's in love. He shook his head, smiling. Then I'll keep pouring. They spent the rest of the day doing nothing important, fixing a loose hinge on the garden gate, arguing over whether the storage panel should go under the floor or behind the counter, eating dinner on the floor because the table was still half built. They moved like people who had all the time in the world, because for the first time they did. And when night came and they lay together beneath a cloth roof, beneath real stars, Lyra pressed her head to Marcus's chest, listening to the sound she once believed would only belong to someone else. A heartbeat, a promise, a home. They had walked from silence, and now they were song.